Joker is finally out in theaters across the world and not just in some countries before the United States. And a lot of people have seen the film so far, I hope. If not, this is going to be a spoiler filled review of the film. We're going to talk in depth about certain plot points, certain sequences, a little about the characters, a lot about the characters. I've already expressed my love for it. I've seen it thrice now. I saw it first on Tuesday as part of the advanced screening. I saw it on Thursday during Comic Con, and I just saw it a few hours ago again. Now I have seen this movie 3 times. So I wanted to see it that many number of times because I wanted to have different interpretations and I wanted to look at things a certain way each separate time. And after watching it 3 times, I actually do have 3 different versions of this film, particularly when you get to the ending, which we'll talk a lot about in detail later. But first, let's start off with how this film opens up. One of the things about a film where a character goes through a downward spiral and becomes something else always starts off a very specific way. Character is doing really, really well. Things are going great, and everything is all up, 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 and then something horrible happens and things come crashing down. In this film, what I found interesting, as I was mentioning to my friend when after watching it the second time, was that this film starts at ground zero. Things are already not the best. He's going to a therapist after he's been discharged from the hospital, an asylum, as we get to know later. It is Arkham. He is on a lot of medication. He doesn't feel too happy. He got lashed up by the kids because he was waving that sign and they stole it, and then they smashed the sign into him and all that. If you've seen the trailers, you know what scene I'm talking about. On top of that, he's trying to be a stand-up comedian, but his jokes are very personal and very disturbing, so to speak. Like, I hope my death makes more sense than my life. Now, that's funny, darkly funny, but it gives you an idea of the mindset that Arthur is in at this point. He's already a broken man, and he's trying to find some way to be happy. He even asked the therapist, I was wondering if you could increase my medication, and she looks at the receipt and says, Arthur, you're already on 7 different types of medication. One of them has to be working. And his response is actually heartbreaking, where he says, I just don't want to feel so bad anymore. And I thought that was so great because immediately you are understanding of the fact that this guy, that he doesn't have a chance right now. He is trying to find some way to reverse where he is and try to spread joy. His mother, Penny, keeps saying it. You were brought onto this earth to spread joy. She keeps calling him Happy throughout the film. That's her nickname for him. What I liked about that entire dynamic is that even though the film later on is saying you're not trying to sympathize with him when he starts doing the bad shit, at the same time, the film is establishing that things are not already good. Like, he's in a society, as it says on the radio in the beginning when he's doing his makeup, Gotham is already under a massive amount of class divisions. You know, wherever people who are poorer live, it's bad. And that is constantly mentioned. Thomas Wayne goes on TV and calls them clowns. I mean, it's so striking, the differences that are shown. And I mentioned in my original review that there are a lot of social political themes addressed in this film, and that will be maybe jarring for some people, and it will get some kind of a debate going. There's a lot of parallels you can make between what's happening in the film and what you finally see in real life. There is some very stark contrasts, and I thought the film addressed those in a very clever way without ever losing track of the story that it's telling. And it tied it very well into Arthur's slow descent. By the time you're at the end of it, this is what you don't want. And it treats it in a way that, you know, if we had been able to call it a little earlier, maybe Arthur would not have turned out the way he does. But he just didn't stand a chance. Let's talk a little bit more about the realism versus fantasy thing as well. I talked a lot about that in my non-spoiler review, which is the film constantly blurs the line between what's really happening in the story and what is Arthur's perspective of what's happening. The first time we get this is fairly obvious. He's at the taping of the Murray Franklin show, and he starts talking about his mom and how he really loves her and how he's trying to connect with Murray, Robert De Niro. And Robert De Niro is so pleased, like, you know, I would give up this show in a heartbeat for a kid like you. And it's like he's saying everything that Arthur wants to hear. But again, this is just a fantasy. One of his friends comes up to him, who works with him as a clown, and says, "Hey, I heard you got jumped yesterday. Here's a gun for your safety if you want to feel better. And, just look out for yourself." And later on in the film, when that gun falls out, when he's at the children's hospital and he gets fired for it, the boss says that, he came up to me a week ago and said you tried to buy a 38 from him a week ago, and now you're showing up with a gun to a kid's hospital. What the hell are you thinking? Now, of course, you can play that off as, oh, that other guy is lying. Clearly, he's not really. He's just trying to cover his own ass and get Arthur in trouble. That is one way to look at it. But again, the film is already blurring lines that, frankly speaking, for all we know, Arthur did ask for the gun. So it's weird, but I like to think that it was the other way. Clearly, it was clearly a setup thing, that things would go wrong somewhere, and Arthur would take the fall for it, no matter what it is. Lo and behold, we're on a subway, and three Wall Street guys stumble in, trying to be creepy to a girl. He starts laughing because early on in the scene, I forgot to mention that he gives a kid. He tries to be funny with a kid on a bus, and the mom reacts. He starts laughing and he gives her the card that says, "I have this brain injury and neurological disease, which is I laugh uncontrollably in all kinds of situations. I can't control it." I thought that was such a great concept because Joker's laugh is something that's very iconic for all kinds of Jokers. There is a certain level of menace to it. What made it so great about this one is that it's this condition. It's like it's eating him alive in a way. Every time he laughs in this film to an extreme capacity, it hurts him. It scratches his throat a lot. He coughs. He's that's also helped with the cigarette smoking, I guess. But he has trouble, and the laughter is uncontrollable. It keeps going on and on and on. And I thought that was such a cool touch because later on in the film, this really helps because it gets more in control as the film progresses. When it first starts off, it's like all over the place, but that was something I found to be creative. But back to the Wall Street thing for a second, those three guys on the train, they start messing around with this girl. He starts laughing, Arthur, and they start singing "Send in the Clowns," which I thought was like, all right, that's okay, that makes sense. And they start taunting him and they start beating him up, and he has the gun which he got from his co-worker, and he shoots them, all three of them. And that is the first major moment we see him start to metamorphosize into Joker. He starts to become a little more sinister. He's a little afraid though. He's unsure of what he's done. In that moment, he has killed these three men in cold blood. But as soon as he does it, he's scared, like, oh my god, what have I done? And it leads to, in my opinion, the most well-crafted scene of the film, just in terms of the almost transcendence of it all, which is the bathroom dance. That sequence is beautiful. It's just such a well-done moment of the film, and it's the first time in the film that things sound a little more triumphant in a way. Like, it's suddenly his character starting to make a bit of a change, because as the film progresses he becomes more and more confident, and his problems within him start to reduce, and he starts to become more in tune with what's going on around him. I also really like the fact that each act break, each transformation of him into a different level of the Joker is accompanied with that dance. It's almost like an interpretive thing. You can sort of put your own meaning to it, because the first one is slower, the second one is more upbeat, the third one is in full view of everyone. The first one is isolated, the second one is in front of those two cops in the background, and the third one is in front of the entire mob finally in the end of the film. That's just how I saw it. But the thing I really liked about it is the behind the scenes, apparently, of this, because in an interview a few days ago, the dance was choreographed, but originally that particular scene happened because during the time they were making that, the composer of the film, Hildur Gudnadottir, she sent in the score and they started playing it, and they just sort of started moving around with it. So I thought that was a really clever touch too. By the way, that score is still amazing. The bathroom dance thing is one of my favorite pieces of the entire score. Please listen to it if you've not listened to it yet. But let's talk about the Wayne of it all, because later on in the film, we find out that Thomas Wayne knew the employees who were killed on the train. Meanwhile, Arthur's mom is still trying to get through to him, and she's trying to send this letter out, and Arthur reads this letter, and it creates a very interesting dynamic all of a sudden, where it's a reveal that Thomas Wayne could possibly be the father. He goes over to Wayne Manor, he meets a kid who obviously, you know who the kid is, right? He says his name in the film, you obviously know who the kid is. And that was cool. Even though I knew who it was, just hearing the kid say, "I'm Bruce." Like, I love it. But that entire sequence too is so well done, because it again starts to create this layer of what's real in Arthur's life and what's not. The entire time he's been led to believe that Penny Fleck is his mother. And then he starts to get a few revelations. One, that she was apparently insane. Two, he was possibly adopted and Thomas Wayne is not his father at all. And that he was very abused as a kid, and he actually does not have a real name. Arthur Fleck is just a name that's given to him. That's not the name he was born with. And I thought that was interesting because it created a few different layers. Now, when I watched it the third time today, my friend said, I have a feeling that maybe Thomas Wayne could be the father. And in this scenario, he could have forged the documents so that he could not be associated with Penny, and he could get away safe with Martha Wayne. Maybe. That is one way of looking at it. Or B, it is exactly that. Penny went overboard, she went crazy, she abused Arthur as a kid, and basically led to whatever he is now. And no, that's not her son. Speaking of realism, we gotta talk about Sophie, the character, because she is real, but not in terms of the stuff that we see in the film. There are probably only 2 scenes in the movie which are genuinely like, yeah, that happened. The very first scene when she's first introduced in the elevator, it stops and she says, "This building's so awful, isn't it?" And then she goes, "Phew, that's real. That did happen." And then when they get off the elevator and Arthur goes, "Hey," that's also real. But then I don't think everything else was real. That just did not seem real. I think he probably did stalk her around the city. I don't know if she ever found out, because later on when he shows up to the apartment, like, she's creeped out by it. And then she finally says that your name is Arthur, right? So when you see her in sequences throughout the film, like after the stand-up comedy special, she's walking around with him on the streets, they go get a bite to eat. Those things are fake. So clearly he is imagining her in his head. During this entire time this has been happening, though, Penny has been admitted to the hospital. And so Arthur, having heard all the crazy stuff about Penny so far, and he doesn't believe any of it because it's his mom he loves, he finally goes over to Arkham, goes through the files, and realizes, yeah, apparently she was schizophrenic and had a very narcissistic personality. And he starts reading through the files and finds out, yes, he does not actually have a name, that he was adopted. But like I said, the film had that idea, but especially when my friend brought up the idea about the forged documents, I kept thinking, yeah, maybe none of this is real. There's so many things in this film that are up for debate that way, and it's up to the perception of the viewer what you want to believe. If you want to believe that this is really happening, it's happening. If you don't want to believe it, don't believe it. And at the same time, Murray Franklin apparently got a video of the stand-up special where he kept on laughing and uncontrollably, being able to just not being able to be in the headspace, and aired it on national television. So Arthur has that going on as well. So he's just found out his entire life is a lie, things are not going well with him in the present, and he just got embarrassed on national television. On top of that, Murray Franklin has called him to be on the show as a guest. So all of these things are coming together, and basically an entire man's life is a lie here. And he starts by killing his mom, which was very disturbing in the theater. When I said that there are some very disturbing and uncomfortable sequences, the hospital sequence where he smothers his mom to death with the pillow, probably the one that I think most people in the audience were very adverse to. That was the one of the few times in the film I actually heard people in the audience go, oh my god. Later on, when that colleague who accused him of having the gun from earlier comes by, he kills him with a pair of scissors, slowly getting rid of all the people who have wronged him, and he dresses up and he starts to head over to the Murray Franklin show. He has a second dance sequence here, which is more confident. It's on the steps, which is in Grand Concourse in the Bronx, which was pretty cool. I know where that place is. That was cool. That was a great sequence that leads to the subway sequence. And now I'm just narrating the movie at this point. He is now on the show. He's about to go on. And we have what is basically our third dance moment when he's just about to take center stage at the interview. Why I like this a lot is because it's slower, it's more confident, and then he makes a spinning entrance onto the show, and you know this guy has now fully transformed into the Joker. And I really like that because throughout the film, while he's even becoming that, one great decision they've made is his voice is changing. It's gone from something that was very quiet, as well as his laugh, by the way. His laugh is more controlled as well. And the voice was very shaky. It was a bit nervous. He wasn't being able to figure out what exactly to say. And as soon as he walks onto the interview and he starts talking and things become more clearer and he starts to really speak his mind as he confesses to things that he's done and what he thinks of society around him, his voice becomes clearer, his method becomes clearer, his approach is clearer, and of course he ends up doing some pretty crazy stuff, including and not limited to shooting Murray in the face, which was a devastating moment. But one thing I haven't talked about in this whole time is because Thomas Wayne called everybody clowns who lived in Gotham who was not rich or whatever, they've all been protesting on the streets in clown masks. And they're on the train, they subdue the cops that have been after Arthur because of the subway incident early on in the film. And now that Joker has done this on television, the riots are even more fueled, things are getting worse, and eventually it's going to lead to a mass blowout, which it eventually does. What Joker does to Gotham City by the end of this film is very akin to stuff that happened in LA, Detroit. This is a city being razed to the ground. It's almost nightmarish because this is the stuff that you wish never happens again in a major city. And here it is happening in Gotham, aka New York City, which is just insane to behold. What I do appreciate about everything that we see in this finale, though, is that none of this is condoning what Arthur has done. Again, like I said, we feel bad for him before all of this has happened. But like the film, we're also sort of hoping that this doesn't happen. We're hoping that Arthur gets a chance somewhere in here to reverse things, but he's just not being given that chance. Things are just getting worse and worse. So his final transformation into Joker, you don't like what's happened. You wish he had a normal life. He seems like a good person at heart. He just had really bad luck. But again, that doesn't justify the ends don't justify the means. It's like at the same time, it happened. What he does is still terrible. He has sparked a movement that has sent Gotham into a spiral. Things have gone from bad to worse, and eventually it does lead to the stories coming together. So you gotta understand, Thomas Wayne is in this universe. We've had Bruce Wayne as well. Martha Wayne's still here. What's gonna happen in the middle of a riot in the middle of Gotham City? Well, maybe, don't quote me on this, a family could walk out of a theater in an alleyway and get shot. Granted, I knew it was gonna happen at this point because I figured, I don't think I see this movie ending with Thomas Wayne walking out alive. And I know how that ends for him, so I figured, you're gonna have your big Batman moment here. Which, honestly speaking, this version, if I would honestly pay to see Batman in this world that has been created in this movie. That would be crazy. And once all of this ends, I love the shot where he's in the police escort after Murray Franklin's show. The car is hit by this fire truck. He gets out, he's unconscious, and he gets up and he sees the entire crowd around him and they're all cheering for him. And he takes his mouth, and early on in the film, he's trying to spread it as much as he can to try and see how much he can smile like this. And he finally stretches it out like this, and there's blood in his mouth because of the crash injury, and it spreads across his face and creates a smile. And that, in my opinion, was like the most whoa moment of the film for me. That was sheer cinematic brilliance. Sadistic, yes. Uncomfortable, yes. All those things I acknowledge. Film is also subjective, and I kind of love this film. Now let's talk about the ending, because there are so many different questions about what happens. At the end of the film, Arthur is sitting in a psychiatric ward at Arkham, and he is saying, I just thought of a joke to this new therapist of sorts. And she says, what's the joke? And he says, you wouldn't get it. And we see a flash of Bruce Wayne standing over the bodies of Thomas and Martha Wayne. Now, there's three different ways I saw this. This is one of the reasons I saw the film multiple times. The first time I saw the film, I thought back to earlier on in the film, when the earlier therapist asks him this question about when you were in the hospital, what was it like? Do you know why you were there? It cuts for a brief moment to him hitting his head on the door, and he says, who knows? And the first time I saw the film, that final sequence I thought was in the past. It was before all of this had happened, and then when he finally walks out with the bloody footprints, I figured, oh, he's always had that tendency. But then on second viewing, I thought that was kind of ridiculous, because later on, I thought maybe it is after the entire events of the movie. Maybe he's back in the ward, he's with this new therapist, and now she is killed, and he is back to his murdering tendencies again. You can't cage this guy now because he's out there. And that was my second interpretation. That's the easiest interpretation to make, I guess, that it all happened. I think the reason I came to that, though, is also because of the shot of Bruce Wayne. Because it was like, hey, wait, so did that happen? That did happen. If that happened, then we can clearly acknowledge that maybe this is real. We're not in a fantasy right now. Or C, it is all a fantasy. If it was all a fantasy, that would be pretty smart too. Like, imagine if this was just one big long joke. What if this was the killing joke? And you just saw the entire thing play out in front of you, and then eventually you ended up with this version of the story, which happened, but in the sense that it's what we're seeing inside a psychotic mind just deteriorate, which creates a lot of layers. So it makes you ask the question, what if everything you just saw was fake and just out of a monologue about a joke? What if that was the actual thing? What if the film is intentionally made that way? That is one of the more mind-bending theories that seems to be going around, and frankly, I can see it working. I can see a lot of people latching on to that one. Personally, if you were to ask me which theory I agree with more, I would say it's the second one, where I think it takes place after the riot sequence. But that's just my simple self who's thinking, you know what? That's what I want it to be. Because I wouldn't mind if it's either of the other two as well. That's just how I'm interpreting it. I am interested to know how you all interpret it, though, because I do know there's a lot of viewpoints going around and a lot of thought processes on what actually happens in the film. I am sorry if that seemed brief, but it's pretty simple, and I wanted to get my condensed thoughts on it because this video is already going pretty long, so I can understand if you guys want to be done. So, Joker, have you seen it? What did you think about it? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know. And thank you so much for watching this spoiler-free review so far. That's got a lot of views. This is not a major, huge channel. So it getting the views it's been getting is awesome. It's about to hit the 4 digits, which I really love. I'm so glad about that. And I hope you guys give very similar love to this video as well. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe. And I'll see you guys at the movies.